Hello, and welcome to this online presentation, Blessed Michael McGivney, the Thomaston Years. On behalf of the Blessed Michael McGivney Pilgrimage Center, thank you for joining this session as we continue to examine the life and the legacy of Father Michael McGivney, parish priest and founder of the Knights of Columbus. In this session, we'll be examining Father McGivney's final years, his time as a pastor in Thomaston, Connecticut, at St. Thomas Church there, where he was assigned from November 1884 until his death, which occurred in August of 1890. If at any point, members of the audience, you have a question that you'd like to submit, there is a question utility on the right side of your screen. Feel free to click on that question mark and you can type in a question. I'll have the ability to view those questions and hope to pose them at an appropriate time, perhaps toward the end of our session. This is February 10th. We are recording this event, and it will be available for viewing on demand on the Blessed Michael McGivney's Center's YouTube page, as well as its Facebook page shortly after the presentation. And links to those sites, by the way, are on the resource sheet, which you can download. There is an opportunity to download a resource sheet also from the utilities on the right side of your screen. So joining me tonight, as you've seen already, is Father James Sullivan. Father Jim was ordained a Catholic priest for the Archdiocese of Hartford 6 years ago, and he's currently serving as the rector of the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception in Waterbury, Connecticut, which coincidentally is the city of his birth and upbringing. Father Jim is the second oldest of a family of 6 children, and I'll remind the audience, those that were tuned in 2 weeks ago, that we had his biological sister, Sister Veronica Mary, a sister of life, joined us to talk about Father McGivney's time in Waterbury and her own youth in Waterbury, the experiences that she had in common with Father McGivney growing up in that city. And for those of you who missed it, again, that video is available on our YouTube site. So, Father Jim, I welcome you. Thank you for taking some time to visit with us tonight.
Thank you, Peter. It's an absolute joy to be with you and with everyone watching.
I'm thrilled because, you know, those of us at the McGivney Center are spoiled. We know of your devotion to Father McGivney. We know of your familiarity with him, your attention for Father McGivney and his life and his example really extend even before the time that his cause was introduced. But I'm glad that we're able tonight to share it with a much wider audience. But I think what I'd like to do is to invite you, because you have such an unusual vocation story. If you would, perhaps you could introduce yourself a little bit and tell us how you came to the diocesan priesthood.
Sure. Well, again, thank you very much, Peter. I grew up in a very devout Catholic family. I'm the second of 6, and it was sort of like breathing. Our faith just was a normal part of our life. And I went to Catholic grammar school, public high school, basically because at the time it was difficult for my parents to afford it. Catholic college, Providence College in Rhode Island, which was Dominican taught. My uncle was one of the priests there, Father John McMahon, and he essentially resurrected a defunct Providence College council to 550 men.
Wow.
It was almost to the point that if you went to Providence College and you were a man on campus, you belonged to the Knights. It was that popular. We won Star Council, I think, 2 or 3 times, all because of my uncle and his profound efforts. And so I'd say my love for Father McGivney started in the late 70s, early 80s, right around the 100th anniversary of the Knights of Columbus. I graduated from college, really didn't know what I wanted to do, and I thought maybe the priesthood, so I entered the Dominican seminary for just a couple years, a novitiate, 1 year of studying in Washington, D.C., and realized that I just needed to work with my hands and with my body. That's where my calling was. And so my brother and I sort of spur of the moment. He also went to Providence College. I was a deputy Grand Knight, by the way. My older brother was Grand Knight. And we, spur of the moment, started a contracting business. And we grew it to 33 employees and did an awful lot of work throughout the state of Connecticut and absolutely just loved building. And then got the call, I believe, to become a deacon. I had never married. My brother John has 3 children. And grew the business. I became a deacon, absolutely loved it. No desire to become a priest. Was a deacon for 4 years. And then, as they say, the Lord called. People ask sometimes, how did you know you wanted to be a priest? I say, well, how did you know you want to marry? At some point, you just know. You know that this is your calling. So I went to the seminary. Because of all my previous studies, I only had to enter seminary for 2 years, went to Boston. And like you mentioned, Peter, I was ordained a priest of the Archdiocese of Hartford in 2014. I tell people I've moved from building and remodeling homes to building and remodeling hearts. That's what a priest does. So I'm still in the building business, you might say. I should say building vocation. But I tell people I knew I would love being a priest. I didn't know I would love it this much. I loved building, but the priest is just wonderful. So God worked through it. But on all of that experience in the working world, for owning a business for 25 years, having employees, paying bills, it was all very fruitful in ministry right now. And I've got a big project going on at the Basilica anyway. So it seems like wherever I go, there's a big project to do. But I just love that aspect of my ministry as a diocesan priest.
Wow. Well, I'm sure that as construction projects go in the diocese, no one will have a better construction manager than the Basilica in Waterbury.
Yeah.
So we're delighted to have you join us, Father. And if I recall from previous conversations, it's noteworthy that while you were a layman, while you were in the construction trade with your brother, you actually owned a home and were a parishioner at St. Thomas.
That's correct. Yeah, 1996, most people at some point in their career, they buy a house. So I just happened to buy it right on the Thomaston Plymouth line. I'm actually in Plymouth, which is part of Terryville. I mean, Terryville is part of Plymouth, but I'm right up the street from St. Thomas Church. And I'm actually between where Father McGivney would have traveled, between Thomaston and Terryville. And so I bought that house in 1996. I've been there for 25 years. And yeah, so I'm very familiar with Thomaston, where Father McGivney was.
Well, Father, I've put a map up on the screen for our viewers to look at, and this shows the key cities in the state of Connecticut. Hartford, of course, in the center is the capital, and due south of that is New Haven along the harbor. Waterbury, we noted last week, is a little bit on the western side of the state, there in the center, and it's along the Naugatuck River, and the Naugatuck River extends due north. And if people will follow that Highway 8 just a little north above Waterbury, you'll see both Thomaston and Terryville listed there. Route 8 parallels the Naugatuck River, and also the railroad line paralleled that Route 8 highway. It wasn't there when Father McGivney was there, but it's been built there, and it's a good way for people to identify the area in relation to where Father McGivney was born and brought up in Waterbury, and also where he served his initial years of priesthood down in New Haven. And that's a kind of an interesting place for me to start, if I may, Father, because Father McGivney's brought up in Waterbury. It's a manufacturing community. We know that even for several years he worked in the brass factory after he had graduated school, before his dad allowed him to advance and go on to seminary study. But he came back and was assigned a priest in New Haven. Now, New Haven, as people can see here, is a port city. It's on the railway line as well. It's on the Farmington Canal. I guess what I'm getting at is it's a very large population. I mean, really, up until about Father McGivney's time of ordination, many considered New Haven like a co-capital of Connecticut. He had a much different population and would have had a much different parish base in New Haven than he would have encountered in Thomaston. Do you imagine?
Absolutely, especially with like Yale University being right near St. Mary's Church as well. It was a more sophisticated community, you might say, probably a much more educated community that also had devastatingly poor people in New Haven. It was both ends, you might say. You had the wealthy and the sophisticated, and in the arts, and then you had those who were in the streets and dying, many of them immigrants. And so Thomaston was different. The population at the time of Father McGivney was just over 3,000 people, compared to New Haven, which would have been thousands of people. And it was pretty much all working class. You would not have had the more educated people like around Yale University that you would have had when Father McGivney was there. But at the same time, you didn't have the destitution that you had in New Haven. So you might call it more in the middle. It was average working class people. But I think Father McGivney's personality, fit in with everybody. He would have had that middle class in New Haven as well. The two extremes he would have had less of in Thomaston, but people are people. And Father McGivney had a great love for all people of God. So I think where he was assigned almost didn't matter because of his personality, his gentleness, his love for God, and he treated everybody the same. But there was a difference.
Well, tell us a little bit about Thomaston, if you would. Thomaston, of course, is, as we've noted, right out along the Naugatuck River, and the slide that we're looking at shows that. It was named after a gentleman by the name of Seth Thomas, who had perfected a way of mass-producing clocks. And many, I have, in fact, in my home, my grandfather's Seth Thomas clock. So very well known here in Connecticut. But Father, the church, if you will, was down here at the bottom. If viewers can see my mouse, near the center bottom on the south side of the river, or technically it would be on the east side of the river, is the area that was St. Thomas Church. So it was literally on the other side of the river from the majority of the city, and the railroad tracks you might be able to see run along the river here. So it was literally on the other side of the tracks as well.
Yes. And because Thomaston is a small town, just looking at this map, you might think, oh, what a big area. It's really quite small. So for wherever you lived in Thomaston, it would not be very difficult to get to church. The church was there until about 1967, right around there, because well, that's when it was finally torn down because of the construction of Route 8. But the new St. Thomas was built in 1905, and we'll see pictures of that in a little while, I know. But yeah, this was the church at the time. This is the church that Father McGivney would have served in, right on the bank of the river. My sister, Sister Veronica, who you spoke to a couple weeks ago, she pinpointed the exact spot by going to the zoning office in Thomaston and figuring the exact spot of where the church was. And it's right where Route 8 is today.
Exactly, and we're looking now at a photo of St. Thomas Church and St. Thomas Rectory, and this photo was taken, we believe, about the time that Father McGivney was assigned there. So it was a handsome church constructed of wood, but you know, a very appealing church, and I'm sure that it was a welcome place for the Catholics because we had many immigrants. Do you have any idea how large the parish rolls were at that time, Father?
The parish rolls at that time were about 1,000 people. 1,000 people would belong to that parish, which is a little less than a third of Thomaston. So the Catholic population of Waterbury, for example, was primarily Catholic. It eventually grew into 23 Catholic churches in Waterbury. I've been told it was the most Catholic city in the country per capita. Obviously, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, much more. But Waterbury per capita was the Catholic city of the country. Thomaston, 10 miles north, primarily Catholic. And this would have been the premier church. Right next door in the photo, you'll see the rectory. The debt of the church, thanks in much part to the hard work and zealous efforts of Father McGivney, the debt was paid in 1887. So the following year, 1888, Father McGivney had a little extra money. And what he did was he put electricity into the rectory, and he also put the phone in. And there was in the book, Parish Priest, there's actually a little joke about it. Almost I wonder if he regretted doing that because now everybody could get in touch with him so easily. He was already so overworked. But these are some of the things he accomplished. And I have a feeling, based on his personality, when people love their priest and they see how hard he works, they give. And so I'm sure part of the reason the debt was paid off quickly since his arrival was in part of they saw the love and passion that he had for the church and for the people.
No question. I want to show a little something else that is a memento, if you will, of the original church. This bench or pew is a part of the permanent collection at the Blessed Michael McGivney Pilgrimage Center. And in these two photos, you can see a close-up of the bench. This was an actual seat that was removed when the church came down and donated by a family from the Thomaston area, and its place of prominence in the McGivney Center next to that handsome photo that so many are familiar with Father McGivney. I want to also show some pictures, some period pictures of Thomaston that we've come up with. The train station, correct me if I'm wrong, was very close to where St. Thomas Church was situated.
Very close. I mean, it's essentially the same area. The church, if you're looking at the picture, if you're looking at the left, the church would have been maybe less than 200 feet behind the building on the left. The building on the right is still there. The building on the left is no longer there. So the church is just outside of that picture. And Route 8 is literally, yeah, so that building is still there today. You're looking at it from two different angles.
Right, we looked at one first from the north, and now this is a shot from the south, but you can see what the building would have looked like perhaps closer to Father McGivney's time, and it still has some use today. But this was very close to where Father McGivney's church was, and I'm sure he probably used the train as a mode of transportation to get back and forth. And I'm sure that it was a common method for those that were traveling up and down the north and south in the state, because there were no, as you point out, no highways at the time and no other means of regular transportation beside horse and buggy. Am I right?
That's absolutely right. And it's said that Father McGivney would frequent visits to his mother in Waterbury, which is 10 miles away. So I have a feeling on a personal level, being assigned to Thomaston had a benefit for Father McGivney because he loved his mother, he loved his sister, and his brothers, of course, were entering seminary at that time. But he would frequent visits to his mother, which would have been much more difficult from New Haven. The distance from Waterbury to New Haven is about 25 miles. So this would have been a very easy commute for him. Could almost be walked if he wanted to.
Now, Father, there was on the map that I showed earlier, there was at the lower right-hand corner a Catholic cemetery. So again, this is on the eastern extreme of the town, and Father McGivney would have used that cemetery to lay a lot of his parishioners to rest. And I have a photo of it that you've been kind enough to share with us. This is an aerial photo of the cemetery, and maybe you could just give a little explanation of the layout, please, Father Jim.
Sure. So you're going to see another photo after this one, but this is this is St. Thomas Cemetery, and from the point that you see now, looking into the picture, is all the grave sites that would have been there at about the time of Father McGivney. The ones that you don't see in the picture are those that are to the present day. The cemetery is still being used. That's called the priest circle. There's 7 priests buried there. Father Gaffney is the first one, died in August 30th of 1884. And he's the one, I can't really point to it, of course, but Peter, it's the, if you see that circle, you see 3 grave sites in a row. Father Gaffney's the one on the right, the little tiny, oh, I'm sorry, looking at that one.
On the left, yes, I think he's here.
That's right, I'm looking at the bigger, yes, that's Father Gaffney. And I'll just tell a personal story, if I may. In 1998, just a little bit after buying my house in Thomaston, I joined St. Thomas Parish. I was involved in another parish before that. I moved in, so I figured I'd get involved in the parish in the town. And I heard about the cemetery, went there, and found myself visiting this grave of priests essentially every week. And the picture that you showed a few before of the church, on the left side of the church, there was an enclosure, the history tells us, I did some reading here in Thomaston, that there was an enclosed metal grate where the remains of Father Gaffney laid right outside the church. And it was said that the parishioners kept flowers planted there and cultivated and cared for 3 seasons out of the year, with the exception of winter, of course. So I'm reading this, and I say, wow, the parishioners did this for Father Gaffney for so many years. And then when his body was moved up into this cemetery, I'm thinking, wow, no one's probably done this in well over 100 years. So I started the tradition again of planting flowers around his grave. So there's 7 priests there, Father Gaffney being the first, the Father McGivney's good friend. Father Gaffney, Father O'Brien, Father Carr, 2 Father Langfords, Father O'Connell, and I'm assuming a seminarian named O'Connor, because he died at the age of 23. I doubt he was a priest yet. So he's the 7th. But none of them, only one past 50 years old. 3 of them died in their 20s, Father Gaffney 40, Father O'Brien 45, and Father O'Connell 52. The Langfords both died in their 20s. We'll get to Father McGivney's death in a little while. But if you look at this picture, the lower left-hand corner, you see woods, of course. And the next picture, I assume, Peter, is going to show where Father McGivney came into the cemetery. And so that's the trail that still somewhat remains. You can see it going through the woods. I cleared that trail with the Knights of Columbus back in 2006. Carl Anderson came to a Mass, and we had a horse and buggy just like Father McGivney did. And after Mass, I believe it was Father Gabriel O'Donnell, the procurator for the cause, and a number of others got the horse and buggy, and we walked up this trail. And these stairs that you see are still there. I walk those stairs almost every week. I was there just the other day. And that's where Father McGivney would have walked into the cemetery prior to the road being paved years later. And an artist friend of mine and a parishioner from the Basilica now, currently, Terry Waldron, she's an incredible artist. She surprised me with this beautiful image painting of Father McGivney at the stairs. So this would have been him walking up to visit, to bury people, and the horse and carriage would have come up that road, and he would have gotten out, walked up the stairs, and the horse and carriage would have gone up the road about another 100 feet and then into the cemetery. But this is Father McGivney actually walked these stairs many, many, many times.
Wow, wonderful. And you've also shared some gravestones of the cemetery, individuals whom Father McGivney would have laid to rest.
Sure, you can just tell by
during
the
his
date.
ministry.
Yes, so the Murphy family, the Father McGivney was close to the Murphys. The young boy Murphy, you can see he died there at 15 years, 6 months. Father McGivney was close to him and the family. In fact, if you look at the Murphy gravesite, if it was, you looked closely, you could see the Knights of Columbus emblem on the top of the gravestone. And here's just another example of another gentleman named Joseph who died in 1888. So Father McGivney would have buried him as well. So you could see who he baptized and who he buried by the dates on the gravestones.
Now, Father, you mentioned that the new church, the new St. Thomas Church, was built 15 years after Father McGivney's death.
Mm-hmm.
This is a beautiful stone church, and it's really almost in the center of Thomaston.
Yes, yes. This church was constructed in 1905 for, believe it or not, a cost of $50,000. The stained glass windows alone, which are absolutely gorgeous, they're Munich stained glass, they cost $5,000. I mean, it's unfathomable today what that would cost today. But literally, people put a nickel or a dime in the basket, and that was the offertory back then. If someone put a quarter, it was a lot. And so this church literally was built on the nickels, dimes, and quarters of the faithful of Thomaston. In 2006, on the day that Carl Anderson came to Thomaston, this little street in front of the church was named. It was just a little breakaway from East Main Street. It had no name. It's only 200 feet long. And so on that day, the selectmen came, Carl Anderson was there, and the street was named, and this Father McGivney Way was unveiled. And I'll never forget what the selectmen said. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we followed his way, Father McGivney's way? And then she unveiled the sign.
Ah, beautiful, beautiful. And that too has the emblem of the Knights of Columbus above it. What a great tribute to the order that Father McGivney founded.
Yes, and there's a beautiful plaque on the front of the church, which you can't see here, with a little description of the age and in the memory of Father McGivney as well.
Now, Father, there's an interesting story that I'm aware of, but I know many in our audience are not. And we're looking now at the interior of St. Thomas, a very beautiful church. And the inset photo, the beautiful lady there, happens to be close to you.
That's my mom.
It's your
So
mom.
this is probably one of the most beautiful, intimate stories about my mother and Father McGivney. I should say my family and Father McGivney. My mother died in 2016 in October, and I'd say 2 years before that, when she was in her 80s. On August 14th, which of course is the anniversary day of Father McGivney's death, when he died in Thomaston in 1890, my youngest sister, Moore, who lives in Bristol, which is a town just beyond Terryville, where Father McGivney also served, of course, she said to my mother, Mom, would you like to go to St. Thomas in Thomaston? And maybe we can just go, and it's Father McGivney's death date anniversary. Maybe we just go into church and pray for a little while. So my mom says yes. So my sister and her 3 daughters and my mother entered the church. It would have looked something like this. The lights, however, were not on. And they sat in the front left pew as you're looking at the crucifix, the front left pew. And they were praying. It was quiet. It was dim. The sun was coming through the stained glass windows. And all of a sudden, my mother, who was sitting right next to the aisle, then there was my sister, then my 3 nieces. My mother all of a sudden turns, and her eyes are obviously following someone. And her eyes follow this person up to the altar. The person stands at the altar and looks at my mother. And my nieces see this, my sisters see this. There's no one there. And my sister says to my mom, Mom, who are you looking at? And my mom says, don't you see him? I'm looking at the young priest. He's smiling at me. I got to tell you, I get a little teary-eyed telling the story. And I believe my mother had a vision of Father McGivney. And then he left. My mother followed him again. And when they went out to the car, my sister realized she probably had a vision of Father McGivney. So she pulled the book from the back seat, which I happen to have. It's also in one of there you have it, sure. We all know it, by Douglas Brinkley and Julie Fenster. The beautiful book, Parish Priest, written, I believe, in 2006. My sister pulls it out of the back seat of the car and says to my mother, Mom, by any chance, is this who you saw? And my mother took the book and deliberately tapped it and said, that's who I saw. That's who I saw. I believe what happened. I planted flowers at the 7 Priests' grave, and I had a devotion to Father McGivney. I would go to his grave in Waterbury. I go to his grave almost every day now. That's where I pray my divine office after my morning mass. I get my cup of coffee and I go to his grave at least, I should say, 3 times a week. But my mother, just as I planted flowers in Thomaston, and I believe those 7 priests were praying for me, my mother planted flowers at the grave of Father McGivney. His parents are still buried there, along with 2 of his brothers and his sister. And so I have a feeling, if I were a parent praying for my children, I have a feeling that Father McGivney's parents interceded with Father McGivney. And I think there was just a little miracle there, that Father McGivney was just so appreciative of what my mother did for his parents, I should say. And I believe my mother had a little miracle.
What a beautiful experience. What
Yes.
a terrific encounter. Well, it's clear that your sister shared too the wonderful story of her experience of Father McGivney at St. Mary's Church when your brother Dennis was ill after his heart attack episode, and how she sensed that he was there and asking how he could assist, and she shared what all of us believe was a wonderful, minimally a favor from Father McGivney, if not a miracle, in helping him to recover without any brain injury after he was without regular heartbeat for how long?
26 minutes.
26 minutes.
26 minutes. He had a full heart rate at 37 minutes. I was the first one to the hospital. I don't know if my sister said that. I was the first one to the hospital at 5:30 in the morning. And when I got there, the doctor said, no guarantees, no guarantees. And 3 or 4 days later, he woke up, and I was also there. And I'll never forget, he woke up and he said, hi, Jim. He recognized us immediately. There was no brain damage whatsoever.
Wow.
And the
Wow.
thing is, my sister would not know this part of the story, but the night before that, I was studying for a diaconate exam. And my brother lived a half hour away in Cheshire. And I just had this interior feeling to go to call him. So I called him, no answer, called, no answer, called, no answer. So I said, I got this exam tomorrow. I'm busy, you know. So anyway, I get in my car and I drive to Cheshire. It's a half-hour drive. It's late, just to see how he was doing. I felt something was wrong. And I went in and he was just weak. I said, "You okay, Dennis?" He said, "Yeah." He was a diabetic. I just need some soda. I need something. Could you go out? So I said, should you go to the hospital? I'm okay. I'm okay. That's the way he was. So I left him around 11 o'clock at night, and he had his massive heart attack 3 hours later, and drove himself to the hospital. But had I not had what I believe is a premonition to go and call him and visit him that night and bring him that, he may have died 2 or 3 hours earlier and never even made it to the hospital. He collapsed right on the hospital door. And so it was a blessing all around. He lived for another 12 years, and 12 good years. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, Father McGivney may have been tugging at your heart to
Yes.
look in on your brother.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, another thing that probably tugged at Father McGivney's heart was his love of theater. And coincidentally, Thomaston is renowned for what's known as the Thomaston Opera House. And
Mm-hmm.
coincidentally, it was built in 1884, the same year as Father McGivney arrived. Now, the city itself was not incorporated until 1785, so this is, you know, only a very, you know, 100 years or so, a reasonably short time before Father McGivney is assigned there. We said it was named after Seth Thomas, but this facility is still really the cultural center of Thomaston, and for that matter, much of Northwest Connecticut. No?
Yes, it's in need of some significant repair. It is, but it is used regularly. There's shows there. Of course, at that time, almost every town had their own theater. We even know the whole story of Chip Smith in Ansonia outside the theater where that on Christmas Eve or the day before Christmas Eve when the shooting took place. The Ansonia had a theater as well. Torrington has a theater. Waterbury had the Palace Theater. So this is the theater in Thomaston, but that was the thing to do back then. There weren't movie theaters. Of course, there was no television. There wasn't all the things that we have today. So if there was entertainment, this was one of the great ways that people express themselves in theater. And so Father McGivney did too. Had several plays there and very well received.
I'm sure, and of course, those that have read Parish Priest know of his fondness for putting on plays while he was in New Haven, and he had a great opportunity to do so here in Thomaston as well. Um, you know, the other thing that I should note while we're still talking about Thomaston is that Thomaston had a Knights of Columbus Council. Atlanta Council is the name of the council there, correct? Is it Council 18?
Council number 18, it's actually one of the stained glass windows in the 1905 church was donated by the Knights of Columbus at that time. And so it says right on it, Council 18. It's a window of the baptism of the Lord by John the Baptist. It's in the baptistry. Beautiful stained glass window from Munich, Germany.
Wow, that's beautiful. So Father McGivney, while he was here, would have been, you know, overseeing the development of the Knights of Columbus
Mhm.
at large,
Yes,
but he also had the early years, the early foundations of a council, even in the the parish in which he was serving.
that's correct. And that council is still fairly active today. In fact, the pew that was donated that you saw a few slides ago, that's by Armand Roy, and he's a slightly older gentleman now, but still very much involved, and they have a very good council there. Father McGivney in 1888 did get an assistant in Thomaston. So he was by himself for a while, and it would have been very difficult for him to travel to Terryville and back and all the business, 3 miles away to Terryville, but a rugged ride. But he did get an assistant in 1888. And so that did free him up a little bit to help out with some of the bigger decisions in the Knights of Columbus, one of them being the first council that was going to be opened in Providence, the first council outside of the state, and he had the time to travel to Providence, I believe, twice to pursue some of the bigger mission of the order. But as we all know, he was so humble that when he came to Thomaston, and he was so busy in New Haven, he let the lay people begin to run the organization, and he had the humility to step back and trust. But of course, it was his baby, so you're always going to have an eye on it. And I'm sure he did have a watchful eye from Thomaston as well.
So the map we're looking at, Father Jim, is, we think, a period map of approximately that time. We should say, for folks that are unfamiliar with this area, Thomaston and Terryville is a little bit of a hilly area. It's moving a little closer to what we refer to as the northwest hills of Connecticut, Litchfield County, as you'll note in the bottom center of this map. Terryville, as Father Jim has said, is really just a village in the larger town of Plymouth. And Terryville, too, was named after a clockmaker by the name of Eli Terry, but it didn't have a parish, it had a mission. And because it was the next community east, Father McGivney had to serve the faithful here as well. So it was coincidentally named after the Immaculate Conception. And he would have to travel here at least once a week for a Sunday Mass, would he not? And you said it's about a 3-mile journey between the two locations?
The 3-mile journey up one very big steep hill from the Naugatuck River going up the valley. It's a very difficult climb. I go there all the time. And yeah, so he had 8:30 Mass in Thomaston. Then he had 8 o'clock Mass in Thomaston, I believe, 9:30 in Terryville, and then back to Thomaston again for 11. And there were about 300 worshipers in Terryville at the time.
Wow.
So I don't know if there's 300 there today. You know, it's a bit of a struggling, like many parishes. It's a small little church. That's it. There it is. The one that's the church today. It might hold 150 to 200 people. And this is bigger than the time of Father McGivney. There was an addition put on. The front part is the addition. And so yeah, he had a lot of people to take care of. 1,300 families is a lot.
Gosh.
1,300 people. Yeah. So there was exhaustion. He had 2 parishes. I remember when I got the call to have a second parish. I had the Basilica in Waterbury. That's a big project, big job. And then another priest was retiring, so I got the call, can you take on another church? So I now have actually the church closest to where Father McGivney was born, where my uncle grew up, St. Francis Xavier. So like many priests, I have 2 as well. And it's a lot of work. We need vocations. There were 83 priests at the time in the Archdiocese of Hartford in Connecticut serving the people. And within I think a 10-year period, 12-year period, 85% of them died. And like I said before, rarely would you make 50 years old. So it was a very difficult time. A priest entering the priesthood back then had to have some courage because they knew that they saw what was all around them. You had to have a profound love of God and a fortitude and courage that went with that to serve and self-sacrifice yourself, empty yourself for your flock. And that's what Father McGivney did, as we all know. But he bore great fruit, not only in the nights, but which his greatest desire, which was to be a parish priest.
No, that's evident. In fact, I'm going to go to the next slide, which is a depiction of the cemetery. You mentioned that your mom was very faithful in maintaining the McGivney plot. So this is a photo, I believe, on the left of you and your mom standing right next to the monument of the McGivney plot, as you mentioned. Patrick McGivney, Father McGivney's father, and Mary Lynch McGivney, his mother, are laid to rest here. He had 2 brothers whom we know, John and Patrick, were also priests of the Archdiocese of Hartford, and one of his sisters here. And Father McGivney himself was laid to rest here originally.
Yes. So Father McGivney in the center section well, you can see the McGivney name, but he's in the center. So that's where he was buried, in the center. He left in his will $500 for the construction of the family plot for himself and his parents. So Father McGivney would have left that money in his will to pay for that. And that's where my mother planted you can see on the right the flowers on the photo on the right, looking at the picture. And but my mom would plant flowers there and visit there fairly regularly. And that's where I go. I was there this morning. I go there, like I said, 3 times a week, probably. Yeah.
Right. This is in Waterbury, just a short distance from the Basilica.
Yes, this is what's called the Old St. Joseph Cemetery. So this is all right about the time of Father McGivney and before and after. Yeah.
Tell us what you know about Father McGivney's death. He's assigned in 1884, 1890, and in August, he's literally consumed.
Yes. At the age of 37, he acquired influenza, and it's said that he was actually cured. You know, he was working again after that. He was working through it. And then he made a couple trips down south. I imagine that was for purposes of healing and relaxation. But when he came back, a doctor in New Haven said that there was actually damage, irreparable damage done. And so, you know, that was the beginning of the end, you might say. And, you know, he knew the end would be coming at that young age. He probably is like St. Paul, who would love to stay to serve the people, but also knew that he loved God. But he loved his parish priesthood, and he wanted to be with his people. He wanted to see his brothers ordained too. He wanted to see his brothers ordained, but he was sickly, which was very common at the time. And of course, you don't have the medical care that you have today. And so he was overworked, but he was overworked because he loved. He could have, if he wanted to. He could have sat in the rectory to some extent, you know. I love, of all the expressions of Pope Francis, I think the one that I love the most is take on the smell of the sheep. Now, those days of people knocking on the rectory door are somewhat over. At the Basilica in Waterbury, people do all the time, daily. But the inner city church is proud of the exception. So Father McGivney took on the smell of the sheep. He went out there and he not only shook the bushes, he peered into every nook and cranny finding people. And they loved him, the young, the old. They say when he left New Haven that the people sobbed because they loved him.
They did. They left a beautiful resolution in memory of his service there. And beyond that, when he died, it was said to have been one of the largest funerals in the state of Connecticut.
Yes. Yeah, I think, if I recall, it was 5,000 people that attended his funeral. I mean, I can't remember the last time a person at the town of Thomaston had 3,000. I don't know what Waterbury had at the time. We have 100,000 now, but you know, that's an awful lot of people that one life touched. This is before the days of Facebook and social media too. You know, you're buried a few, and so the word traveled very quickly. They believed he was a saintly man back then.
An important point. He had a wonderful legacy even immediately after his death. And the recognition of that, the church in a formal way, in the process of canonization, refers to it as heroic virtue. But for you and I, it simply means that he was a holy man. He lived a holy life. And the faithful saw that, and they wanted to pay tribute to him. There must have been a wonderful procession, that 10-mile distance that you mentioned earlier, from Thomaston, where his funeral was celebrated, down to this point where he was laid to rest in 1890.
I can only imagine. But you know, at the time too, priests were revered in a way that they're not as much today. We have, I think, 3 public schools in Waterbury named after priests. And so there was just a great admiration for the priesthood. There still is today in many ways. But he exemplified what you said, Peter, not virtue to a heroic degree. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you had to die a martyr. He lived what they call the white martyrdom, the getting up every day and one step at a time and being a zealous person and working when you're tired, serving the people when you really should probably be going to bed and getting some rest, getting up early, spending your time in prayer, just serving the people. And like I already said, it bears fruit. He loved to love. And that's what he did. And he did it all for the greater honor and glory of God, not for himself.
And the people loved him in return.
Mm-hmm.
Father, this isn't where the story ends with Father McGivney, naturally, because the Knights of Columbus had a special request in 1982. Of course, we know that the Knights were founded in 1882 while Father McGivney was serving in Waterbury 2 years before his transfer to Thomaston. And in 1982, the Supreme Knight at the time, Virgil Decken, appealed to have his body reinterred. So his body was exhumed here from this grave, and it was moved to St. Mary's in New Haven, which is where the Knights of Columbus was founded. And now these photos are from that period, are they not?
That's from that period. And this is one of the highlights of my life, I'd have to say. If you look in, that's Cardinal Casseroli on the left. If I heard the story correctly, John Paul II, Pope St. John Paul II, was, I believe, going to come to the 100th anniversary. But you all recall in 1981 he was shot, and so Secretary of State Cardinal Casseroli came, and that's if you're looking at the one with Cardinal Casseroli, I'm the tallest one to the left, and my brother John is to the to the right of the picture, to the left of Cardinal Casseroli, just two to the right. So he's the center one of the three. So myself and my brother there, Father John Langlois, a current Dominican. So three of us became priests. And but yes, I had the privilege of serving the Mass for the movement of his body from Waterbury to New Haven. I just have to tell one little funny story. We had the privilege of doing this because we were such an active council at Providence College. And so my uncle called me, and, you're 21 years old, 20 years old, and he says, well, we have the privilege of serving the movement of Father McGivney's body to New Haven, and he's all excited. And he said, would you like to go? And I remember thinking, I'm not saying this, but in my mind I'm thinking, do I have anything going on that night with my friends? And my uncle must have picked up on it and said, Jim, we can get someone else if you don't want to go. I said, oh, no. Anyway, when you don't understand the significance of the event when I was asked, but so glad that we went. And that's my uncle in the picture with all the servers. He's the one with the stole on furthest to the right. That's my uncle, Father John McMahon, and he would have been in his 40s at that time.
That's the Dominican that you mentioned at the outset, who was
Yes.
so adept at rebuilding the council. So Father McGivney's body was exhumed on December 8th of 1981, and then it was reinterred on the 29th of March. That is what the Knights of Columbus observes as Founders Day. It's the occasion that the Connecticut legislature, the General Assembly as it's referred to, gave official sanction to the Knights of Columbus. So that was when it was moved, and it was wonderful that you were a part of it. Your brother was a part of it. What a joyous occasion. And of course now Father McGivney's body, his remains are within this beautiful granite sarcophagus, which is in the nave of St. Mary's Church. You see the inscription there at the left, the base of it, and the photo on the right is recently during the weekend of his beatification. It was beautifully adorned with white roses, and they had an honor guard there. A sister was praying. There was a vigil that began on Friday evening before the actual beatification mass on Saturday, which took place at the Cathedral of St. Joseph in Hartford. But throughout the night, people prayed with the remains at the tomb of Father McGivney in the church. And so tribute is paid to him there on an ongoing basis at St. Mary's. Father, what a meaningful experience that you've had so many times in your life, these encounters, if you'll permit me to call them that, with Father McGivney. This one in a very real sense, as you were a server while Father McGivney's body was reinterred here, but the experiences that you shared earlier, your mom's encounter of him spiritually at St. Thomas Church, and then it was right here at Father McGivney's grave that Sister Veronica, you and she and I think another brother had gone to mass at midday.
Yes.
And then that's the occasion that she felt Father McGivney speaking to her, communicating with her, and asking, because she had a nursing background, what am I to do for Dennis? And that's when he recovered. So many occasions.
Yeah, Peter, I'll just add, for me, it's just unbelievable journey. From the time of 20 years old, having the privilege of serving the Mass, becoming a Knight of Columbus at 18 under the guidance of my uncle, Father John McMahon at Providence College. Little did I know that I would become a priest one day, and then after that, to actually be assigned to Waterbury, to the church that Father McGivney grew up in, the Immaculate Conception. Of course, not the same building, and they had bought a house in Thomaston. It's for myself personally, it's just, I'm closer to him than, when you look back on your life, you say, wow, he's kind of with me the whole way. And I think my journey into priesthood has a good bit to do with his example and his life. And so I'm just so grateful to God for that. I can't express it enough.
And now you're doing exactly what he did on a daily basis. You're administering the sacraments. You're guiding people in the practice of their faith. You're inspiring them and helping them to live holy lives. I just can't imagine what Father McGivney would have had to do on a daily basis there in Thomaston. I mean, there were so many sick calls. I'm sure there was the education of the young. There was baptisms and anointings and preparations for the sacraments. I'm sure that the life of a parish priest every day had something assigned to it. There was probably rarely a day off.
Absolutely. You could go all the time. It's, I'll just say this one thing, but the other day, I went 17 and a half hours straight. It was just morning until night. And then it was people dying in I had 2 deaths in the hospital, and that's not an untypical day. But sometimes when you're exhausted at the end of the day and you get that call, believe it or not, God gives you a special grace. And you end up going to bed and just saying, thank you, God. I was tired, but God is never outdone in generosity. And so when you say yes, you get the return in spades in one way or another. The life of a priest is as busy as that priest wants to be. But if you want to serve and want to be busy, there are always people to serve. And Father McGivney was one of those who felt that way. Yeah. I hope to follow in his example in some small way. Yeah, be honored to.
Well, it seems as though Father McGivney has been with you, as you've noted shortly ago, at so many occasions throughout the course of your life, and leading you to the priesthood, perhaps, and I'm sure accompanying you in your priestly ministry on a daily basis.
Yes, indeed.
I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight. One of the things that we've asked other guests to do is to be mindful that Father McGivney has achieved an important first step on the road to sainthood. He's been beatified. We now can refer to him as Blessed Michael McGivney. There was a miracle decreed on his behalf, his intercession, that cured a child in the womb, as you know. But we're waiting and praying for another miracle, Father Jim, that perhaps the Vatican will recognize again at Father McGivney's intercession, and that will enable him to reach full sainthood. We have a prayer that we've all been praying for 20 plus years. And as we say goodbye tonight, I want to, before I ask you to lead us in prayer, I want to say thank you again for your willingness to share this, because your experience is closer than most people's, and I think it's important to see that Father McGivney's interaction, Father McGivney's um, presence in the life of many people is real. It's
Mhm,
ongoing.
mhm,
These miraculous occasions, like the one that enabled him to be beatified, is certainly significant. But the favors and the grace are there, and you've already related in very plain terms how you've seen that in your family, and so many others are. I know that the McGivney Guild, which invites people to pray and share those favors, receives them on a regular basis. Quite often, he's interceding for people who have lost their jobs. He's interceding for parents whose children have strayed from the faith, or just other sorts of healing in the family. His love for the family, his love for children and their welfare is well known
mhm.
from all of his priestly days, and it continues, I know now.
And
I
and
want
what
to
I
say,
think, oh, sorry, yeah.
oh,
If I
please.
just make one final thought, was I think we're going to see Father McGivney very much alive in the coming years, is in the area of vocations. He lived at a time where there was a shortage. We're living in a time where there is a shortage. I have a feeling he's going to be, through his intercession, a great promoter of vocation. We need priests, and I know that they're out there. I say it all the time to the people of the Basilica. I know there are young men here who are called to the priesthood. And we have a great model from our own parish in Father McGivney, from our own archdiocese to follow. And great things, I believe, are coming down the road. We always have to have hope. We all know that. And I believe there's great hope for the future of the church.
Excellent point about the comparison between the two eras, and I'm sure Father will be a strong intercessor for leading other men to follow him in the priesthood. I want to say that we're going to focus a little bit on his seminary time. 2 weeks from now, Deacon Vito Piazza is the director of the St. Mary's Center Spiritual Center in Baltimore. Baltimore was the city where Father McGivney did what we would refer to today as his major seminary, his theological studies. And the site where he studied is no longer the seminary. The seminary itself still exists, but like you mentioned shortly ago, the parish of the Immaculate Conception that Father McGivney attended as a young man has been moved to a new church. So too has the seminary been moved to a new location in the city of Baltimore. But the site where Father McGivney studied is still there, and it's important because it has a significance with not only Father McGivney but two other very significant figures in the history of the Catholic Church in America. And I'm not going to reveal them because you got to tune in 2 weeks from tonight if you want to learn that from Deacon Vito. But so there's a link in the sheet that I spoke of earlier. Please use that to sign up, or I'll send you an email. All of our wonderful audience members, and we thank you all for joining us tonight. So, Father Jim, before we sign off, I wonder, please, if you could help us to say that prayer to Blessed Michael McGivney.
Be honored to. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. God our Father, protector of the poor, defender of the widow and orphan, you called your priest, Blessed Michael McGivney, to be an apostle of Christian family life and to lead the young to the generous service of their neighbor. Through the example of his life and virtue, may we follow your Son, Jesus Christ, more closely, fulfilling his commandment of charity and building up his body, which is a church. Let the inspiration of your servant prompt us to greater confidence in your love, so that we may continue his work of caring for the needy and the outcast. We humbly ask that you glorify your servant, Blessed Michael McGivney on earth, according to the design of your holy will. Through his intercession, grant the favor I now present. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Father Jim Sullivan, it's been a joy to have you and to have you share your experiences and your knowledge and your love for Father McGivney and his love for you and your family. Would you impart a blessing on us all before we say goodnight?
Thank you so much, Peter. The Lord be with you.
and with your spirit.
May Almighty God bless you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Go in the peace of Christ.
Thanks be to God. Thanks so much, Father Jim, and good night, everyone. God bless, and hope to see you again in 2 weeks.
Good night, Peter. Thank you.